I have the privilege and honor of introducing our speaker tonight. And just to let you know, we are also very fortunate to have her organization sponsor this event for us tonight. So that we thank you very much for that. So Amy Haddon leads the marketing and communication, sustainability, and engagement efforts for Renewable Choice Energy, a pioneering provider of clean energy products and services to the C&I market sector. Hope you don't mind if I read this. I'm not good at memorizing. She was responsible for the creation of marketing and communication strategy to engage corporate clients and has worked with some of the largest brands in the world to develop customized communication and sustainability programs and tools. Amy is a trusted voice on renewable energy markets and trends and has been a featured writer and presenter for the American Council on Renewable Energy, the American Wind Energy Association, and the International Society for Sustainability Professionals, amongst many other things that she's done that for. Amy is a former marketing director and sustainability consultant for
Mosaic.
Good. I'm glad you said it, 'cause I couldn't pronounce the first word. Previously a wholly owned subsidiary of Renewable Choice. During her time with Mosaic, Amy led corporate engagement on supply chain sustainability, environmentally preferred purchasing, sustainability communications, and corporate social responsibility for customers including Gap Incorporated, Facebook, Jackson Family Wines, Octal, Akamai Technologies, and the National Basketball Association. Again, there's quite a few others in there. She's done stuff. Amy received a master's degree in organizational performance and change from CSU and is a certified sustainability professional and has completed advanced training in sustainability, climate change mitigation, and GRI report writing. She serves as an adjunct faculty member in the Environmental Studies Department at Europa University, where she teaches. Please help me welcome Amy to our program.
Thank you. What I'm going to be talking about is bringing you up to speed on what's happening in corporate renewables, because there's a lot going on, and particularly in light of some troubling rumors about what could happen with our new incoming administration from a policy level. I can tell you that corporate renewables are driving our industry forward and not slowing down. So that's the good news for tonight. And we'll talk more about that. So let me go ahead and just say a little bit about Renewable Choice while I'm up here, because I want to let you know where I'm coming from. We are a mission-driven organization. Our mission is to make it ever easier for all organizations to use clean renewable energy. We're up in Boulder. We were founded in 2001 by Quail Hodek. Some of you might know Quail. It feels like he knows everybody, so if you don't know him, you might run across him in your time in this industry. We are a real pioneering leader in the C&I market space. We were a market maker in that particular sector. In 2006, which I'll talk about in a minute, we helped to broker the first Fortune 500 renewable energy deal ever, which was with Whole Foods Market. So we've been doing that for a long time, and that continues to be our passion. Currently, we have clients ranging in about the 150 to 160 range of the Fortune 500, plus thousands of other small to medium-sized businesses, universities, municipalities, etc. Some of you know, because it's been in the news in the last few days, that we were acquired by Schneider Electric recently, which is really great, exciting news for us. If you're not familiar with Schneider, they're one of the most sustainable companies in the world, and they were doing work very similar to ours. So our combined strength will help us just track down our mission even faster. We're very excited to partner with them on that. We're also a founding member of Rocky Mountain Institute's Business Renewables Center, and we're the exclusive North American partner to CDP on renewable energy. So chances are you're here because you've heard some of this news. And this is really, the slide features some of our clients and the work that they've been doing in wind and solar predominantly. But corporates have really been taking the renewable energy sector by storm in the last few years. And if you follow any of the news, you've probably seen that and heard that. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's happening, who the players are, and just help define the market for you a little bit so you have a deeper understanding of what's driving it. So as I was putting my slides together, I was really wrapping my head around how do I talk about this, because there's a lot of intersecting pieces. So I'm going to be defining the what, the why, and the how, but I might not do so in a very linear way. So I just invite you to stay with me. And if you have questions, please don't be shy. I'd be happy to stop and take those. And of course, I'll take some at the end too if you hold them. Okay, so renewables, as everybody knows, are a relatively new topic for many. They're even still relatively new in the corporate purchasing space. We really didn't see the first adoption of renewables by corporate buyers until about 2001. Now, I was realizing on my way here tonight that the first 2 corporate buyers in the country, in the world, were here in Colorado, which is really exciting. It was New Belgium Brewery, which is up in Fort Collins, and White Wave Foods, who used to be in Boulder, and now I'm not sure where they are. They're owned by Dean Foods, I think, now, but Silk is their brand. Probably a lot of people are familiar with that. So then, as I mentioned, in 2006, we were responsible for helping to broker the Whole Foods deal, which at the time was the largest commitment by a Fortune 500 to renewables, which was super exciting. And then we began to see real market shift in 2008 when the University of Oklahoma signed the first power purchase agreement by an institution. And from there, it's really just taken off. In 2010, Google signed their first PPA. They've now done more than 22 PPAs around the world. They're the largest user of renewable energy in the world, which is pretty exciting by some magnitude. Second, in case you're interested, is the Department of Defense. So the government uses quite a bit as well. And now C&I buyers are really leading the charge. In 2015, they accounted for more than half of the new wind capacity that was purchased in that year. So I like to share this graphic because it really shows you how we went from, kind of early adopter to, whoa, a really amazing hockey stick curve there in the corporate buying space. Last year, you can see that it leveled off a little bit. The primary reason for that was that at the end of 2015, that was when we thought tax subsidies were going away. So there was a huge rush in the market to try to get projects started. Turns out they didn't go away, which was good. So the market's stabilizing. And what we anticipate is just steady growth from here. However, new numbers were just released last week. They were covered by Utility Dive that we're currently at almost 8 gigs in the corporate space, and expected to go to 60 by 2025. This chart is a little bit of a misnomer, is a little bit mysterious, a little bit not accurate, because these numbers are really talking only about power purchase agreements, which I'm going to speak on. Many, many, many companies are also using renewable energy certificates, and that's not captured here. So this is really just the growth specifically in PPAs. So there's really 3 things that are motivating companies to buy renewables. Environmental is certainly still a huge motivator. Used to be that was the primary motivator, is that either because they thought it was the right thing to do or they were getting pressure from NGOs, companies were using renewables to meet those environmental goals. And that continues to be a huge driver for many companies. In fact, we find that our companies that are most successful in pursuing renewables are those that have an environmental goal. It doesn't mean other companies can't pursue renewables, but the ones that are the most successful have this as their foundation. However, we've reached a point where we have grid parity. Awesome. I've been at Renewable Choice for almost 10 years. Getting to grid parity is like, we never thought it would really happen, right? So it's super exciting that now people can actually buy renewables at the same price or even cheaper than fossil fuels. And so for many companies, taking the economic advantage of renewables is what's driving a lot of the purchasing that we're seeing. There's also a hedge value to renewables, which is that you can fix your price of power buying from wind or solar versus the highly volatile fossil fuel market. And for a company like Google that literally energy is their second most expensive cost, being able to predict that cost and lock it in is hugely valuable. Any questions about those before I go on? Yes, in the back.
What's
People. Yeah, labor I think is almost every company's main cost, yeah. But energy is often number 2 or number 3. Yes?
You might go into this in future slides, but can you explain the difference between renewable energy credits and PPAs?
I will. Yes, thank you. All right, so let me get into that. So let me start by talking about falling technology. Probably people in this room, this is not a surprise to you because you've been following renewables, but the cost of renewables coming down dramatically, particularly in solar. There's some estimations that we've seen the bottom of wind since it's a technology-based cost. With our current technology, we're not driving a huge amount of price fall in wind anymore. But solar is still coming down dramatically, and it's predicted to do so over the next 10 years easily. So at some point, solar is even going to surpass this wind line here. At the same time, PPA costs also coming down. Again, I'll talk about how that affects C&I buyers here in just a minute. And so that accounts for the sort of enormous change and growth over the last few years in the contracted capacity, specifically in wind, although solar is catching up. Another driver is that there is still a lot of NGO pressure on companies. As I mentioned, environmental goals are still very much present for these companies. Especially the larger they are, the bigger the target is on their back. So this Greenpeace report, this one was just released on Friday, I think. This Click and Clean report has been what has driven a huge amount of C&I adoption over the last few years because Greenpeace basically gave everybody an F. Amazon, Facebook, even Google had like a C when they first did the report. And that really motivated buyers to up their game when it came to renewables. They also have the RE100, which is made up of the Climate Group and CDP, really driving commitments to renewables. There are now more than 80 companies worldwide that have made a 100% renewable energy goal through the RE100. They're very public goals. And so once folks are embedded in that RE100, really hard for them to get out. So now they've got to figure out, how am I going to meet that goal that now my CEO has said, go and meet that goal. Finally, the buyer's principles. Some of you might be aware of the corporate buyer's principles. It's a joint effort between WWF and WRI. It's very similar to the RE100. It's effectively recommendations and guidelines for C&I buyers on how to get renewables. And it's driven a lot of the sort of early adoption in the C&I space. Another driver is the reporting and regulatory environment. So is everybody familiar with CDP? No? Okay, good. CDP, I always think it's a shame they shortened their name, but I understand why they did it from a branding perspective, is the Carbon Disclosure Project. It's an NGO that was started in London. They also have a big office in New York, and they are the largest repository of climate change-related information in the world. More than 7,000 companies around the world report to CDP every year. And particularly among big companies, it's very competitive to try to be at the top of the list. CDP gives a lot of honorifics to those companies. And so there's a lot of competitive pressure as well as pressure from CDP to participate in CDP reporting. WRI has been working really closely and intently on climate action in particular. And they released some new guidance, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, on how to classify emissions a couple of years ago, which is really driving reporters to CDP. So WRI is also a big player in this space. And GRI, some of you might be familiar with, that's the Global Reporting Initiative. And they are who companies file their corporate social responsibilities report with. And they have very clear guidelines on material indicators within those reports, including many around energy, emissions, climate action, etc. So these three entities combined, putting a great deal of pressure on companies to be doing the right thing and reporting it. So as I mentioned, WRI has really been leading the charge on policy as it relates to emissions and then how that relates to climate action. There's a lot of NGOs working on climate action, but WRI is like at the foundation. So WRI classifies emissions in 3 different categories. And this is important in our discussion because what we're primarily going to be focused on is this middle category, Scope 2, which is the emissions from purchased electricity. So Scope 1 are what are considered direct emissions. So those are the emissions that get generated from, say, a boiler at your facility, right? You're using the propane, you're controlling the volume of that propane, so you have some control over those emissions. That's considered a Scope 1 source of emissions. Scope 2, considered to be indirect emissions from purchased electricity primarily, but also from things like purchased steam or purchased chilled water. Not a lot of companies purchase those things, but if they do, those are considered in the Scope 2 category. Scope 3 then, this big giant category that includes all other emissions. And these categories take a life cycle approach. So if you produce a product, Scope 3 emissions are going to include everything ranging from the emissions associated with your employees' commutes to and from work, with your suppliers, and the emissions that they created as they were working on the components for your product, the methane emissions from your waste stream. And so this category, very big, very deep. This is kind of like the big black box of emissions. If we all figure out how to get our hands around this, we'll do some real good. But in the meantime, this is also a huge category. Purchased electricity, as I mentioned, usually one of a company's largest expenses. And so getting our arms around Scope 2, highly valuable. What's been really interesting is that this used to be the largest source of emissions, electricity emissions in the United States. As of the end of 2016, that flip-flopped. Electricity is now number 2. Transportation emissions is now number 1. That means renewables are working. I know it doesn't seem like that, but it does. It is. Any questions about this before I go on? Yes?
What is the percentage breakdown? Do you have numbers on average, what that looks like?
For a company or for the United States? Or?
For the states.
Yeah, so let me see if I can call that up. I want to say it was, somebody could probably look at the EPA and figure this out, but quicker than I can. I want to say that purchased electricity and transportation combined were about 60%. Landfill gas is around like 15%. Agricultural waste is around 22%, somewhere in there, and then everything else in the remaining category. Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, what corporate buyers are trying to do is address that Scope 2 category, that middle category of emissions related to their purchased electricity or steam or cooling if they use steam and cooling. And so when I say renewables, really what we're talking about is renewable electricity, right? So I'm not talking about fuel cells or hydrogen cells. I'm really just talking about wind, solar, geothermal, tidal, some hydro, small hydro. And that's what they're really trying to do, is to address those purchased electricity emissions because there's such a huge category for most companies. So they can do that in 3 ways. First is with ONSITE, which we're going to talk about each of these in a little bit of detail. Second is with OFFSITE generation, which are power purchase agreements, primarily, which I'll, again, talk about in just a minute. And then the third is with environmental attributes, or energy attribution certificates. Most of us probably in this room are familiar with renewable energy credits or certificates, RECs, which is what we have here in the States. But there are these types of instruments all over the world, and increasingly in emerging markets, which we'll address here in just a minute. So frequently what we see with our buyers is that, if this is somebody who's really just coming into the market, let's say they have just wildly set a 100% renewable energy goal. They joined the RE100. Well, then it's going to be up to that sustainability manager or that energy manager to figure out how to get them there. And so what we typically see is that a company might start with RECs. It's a really easy entry point, low barriers to entry, particularly if they're buying domestic products. It's very inexpensive. And then maybe they're going to explore ONSITE, and then maybe they're going to be ready to do a PPA, and eventually they're going to get there. But what we see is that none of of the customers that we're working with, and we work with literally the largest customers in the world, are doing all PPAs or all RECs or all on-site. It's all kind of a blend. And a lot of that depends on the resources they have available, whether they own their buildings or they lease their buildings. There's a lot of factors that go into that choice. And I'll talk more about that as we go through each of them. But the key thing I want to leave you with is that no company is doing just one thing. They're doing a whole blend. And so we try to really approach them at this portfolio level ourselves. So it all really starts with environmental attributes. This is rudimentary, but I find that unless you're really familiar with renewables, you need to have it broken down for you like this, because I feel like it took me like a year to understand this when I came to renewable choice. So renewable power really has two types of commodities associated with it. The first is the electricity, right? So turbine spins, the actual electrons join the grid, and off they go. Are there any wind developers here? I don't want to embarrass you by my rudimentary explanation, but effectively that's what's happening, right? Now, at the same time, those electrons have a birth certificate, okay, which is an energy attribute certificate. Again, here in the US, those are called renewable energy certificates or renewable energy credits or RECs. But I like using that analogy of the birth certificate because the grid is happening in real time. When the energy gets sucked onto the grid, it's gone. There's no way to account for it. And we like to use the analogy of a bathtub, that the grid is like a big bathtub where you're getting coal, you're getting natural gas, you're getting renewables. And once it's all in the bathtub, you can't say, oh, this was the part that came from the wind farm, right? So RECs and other EACs started in California in 1999 as a means, the state started them, as a means to account for that energy. And the environmental attributes of that generation are tied to the EACs. So what that means is that, let's say you're a homeowner and you put solar on your roof. In Colorado, anybody here from Excel? Okay. Yeah, only because you might be able to speak to better than I can if you were from Excel. But in Colorado, or at least it used to be the case, that if you put solar on your roof, you would get that very attractive financial incentive from Excel, but for a price, which was your RECs, okay? And when you sold your RECs back to Excel, you lost the ability to claim that you were using clean generation because the environmental attributes are tied to the birth certificate, okay? So let me tell you why that might have happened. It's because there's two different markets for the trading of EACs. The first is the compliance market. And what that means is that here in the US, I'll speak to that specifically, we have about 30 states that have a goal, a renewable portfolio goal as part of their utility. So here in Colorado, our RPS is 30%. So Xcel's working to get at least 30% renewables into our grid mix by a specific date. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. Anybody remember?
2020.
Okay, 2020 it is. So compliance markets are working the same way because all clean generation, this is happening. Doesn't matter if it's solar or if it's wind. These birth certificates are being created and they are what is tied to the actual claim of clean energy. And so let's say Excel is a good example. They can be, excuse me, they can be getting these EACs, these RECs themselves by either building facilities and just keeping those RECs for themselves, or they can be buying them from other facilities. And that's how they're going to meet their renewable portfolio standard goal, their RPS goal. So there's a second market, which is the voluntary market. Now that's where corporate buyers are hanging out and playing because we don't have anything like a cap and trade in the United States, right? So these buyers are choosing to purchase renewable energy. Now, it works the same way. They can either build something like an on-site installation and keep the EACs associated with that installation, or they can buy them from other places. And that is how all renewable energy is tracked and traded in the United States. That is a very rudimentary explanation of something much more complex. So, do you have any questions about that before I move on? Yes.
So you're saying that if I were to put solar on my house, I'd have to give the credit that I put solar on my house to Excel so they could say we're clean?
You wouldn't have to give it to them. If you wanted to get the incentives, you might, right? But that's an
They
exchange.
take credit.
And then they take credit for being clean. That's right. Yes.
Amy, just a statement, and it applies to that. That kind of scenario is dwindling and going outside of the solar rewards program within Excel Energy, becoming more and more popular. And I've done it myself in my Rex and mine.
Did you pay a premium for them?
No.
That's good.
I just bought solar.
That's uncommon.
But it's becoming more and more common day by
Good. Yes.
How long? So what's like the lifetime of a wreck? Is it like 1 energy year?
Yeah, effectively.
Can you wheel them to like elsewhere?
You can. So there's, we got started really as a rec seller because before companies started using power purchase agreements, it was really the only way that you could buy renewable energy as a company. And so many of our clients have been with us for years, buying renewable energy in the form of EACs year after year after year. Now, what was challenging for us was you had to buy them at a premium, right? Just like the premium with the Excel program, that you were paying your utility bill to your utility provider, and you were buying RECs on top of that. And we used to jump through all kinds of hoops to come up with analogies that would encourage people to do that. Like, it's like organics. You're going to pay a little bit more for clean energy, right? Just like pay a little bit more for organics. Now that we're at grid parity, that's really exciting because now you actually could potentially buy renewable power cheaper than you could fossil fuel. But there are very few utilities that are operating on 100% renewables now. And I just want to call it again that even if they are, they're probably buying some RECs, either from private folks, they're putting solar panels on their homes or wherever, or they might be buying them from other markets that have surplus. So whether you are a PUC or a homeowner or a company, this is how the process works. This is the only way that renewable energy is tracked and traded in the United States and in Canada and in much of the rest of the world. Yes?
Can you give like a range of costs of racks on the market right now? Like, I would assume it's pretty cheap at this point.
That's a great question. So RECs are considered a commodity and they're traded as such. So there are some markets where there are really aggressive RPS goals, like in the PJM grid region, which is Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland. It's not easy to generate renewables there, but they have high goals. So they have to look for whether they can buy RECs elsewhere. The reason they can do that is that the United States is considered to be an interconnected grid. So even those different regional transmission organizations, the independent system operators, they're all connected by the big US grid. So I know that sounds crazy, but it's true that if in Pennsylvania we have a really big goal, we could be buying RECs from Colorado and using those to meet our goal because we're all on the same grid. So in some areas, RECs are trading at a very high rate. In other areas, like North Texas, they're very low. 23 cents this week was what we got on RECs. That is good for adoption, not good for development, which is really the truth. At that price, RECs are not really providing any financial benefit to the projects that they're from, and so they're not really driving development forward. That being said, in many other areas around the world, commodities are trading at a very high price, helping to open markets in many different places, which I'm going to cover in just a minute. Yes, back there?
What's the 23 cents the unit? 23 cents per kilowatt?
Per megawatt hour.
Per megawatt hour?
Yeah. Pretty low.
So that is that REC, the cost of a REC isolated from the cost of energy, or is that coupled together?
Great question. It really depends on what you're buying. So we actually refer to EACs or RECs as either bundled, meaning they're combined with the electricity, or unbundled, meaning that they can be freely traded as their own commodity. And so if I am Facebook and I'm trying to meet my goals, I'm still going to be buying my power from my utility provider, but I'm going to be paying that extra money to buy my RECs on top of that, and I'm buying unbundled RECs. Now, there are lots of PUCs throughout the whole country that offer a combined product, a bundled product, including Excel. Anybody have wind source at their house? Yeah, guess what? You're buying RECs. You're buying them from Excel. They're buying them from somebody else, or they're keeping them from their projects. But that's what you're doing, and that premium that you pay for that is what the RECs cost on top of the actual price of your electricity. So that's a bundled product versus an unbundled product where you can be getting your electricity from your PUC and buying your RECs from North Texas. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
But why does why does the voluntary market exist? Like I understand that certain corporations want to buy RECs because they want to say that they're sustainable. But like why do I have to buy a REC?
You don't have to buy a REC.
Right.
That's totally up to you as a consumer. I think the voluntary market really took off because way back when on that history, RECs weren't so cheap, right? They were expensive, and so they were actually providing financial benefit to projects that was absolutely critical to get projects in the ground. So are you familiar with the term additionality? Okay. Additionality means that if it hadn't been for me, this wouldn't have happened. That's the easiest way to say it, right? So RECs used to have additionality, and so if a company bought a REC that was high priced, that was actual real financial capital that projects were using to get in the ground. Because of oversupply, effectively, in the United States, the cost of RECs has come down really far, and so they're not adding that much financially anymore. But they are a recurring source of revenue for projects that are already in the ground. So that's still really important. And in those international markets that are developing, where the prices are still high, they're helping actually expand the growth in that market.
So concurrent to like PPAs, do these things, do people try to strike agreements, long-term agreements for purchasing their RECs?
They do, yeah. You can purchase RECs in big strips, and you can purchase them usually between 2 and 3 years in advance. We ask our clients not to go more than 2 years because the price is so malleable, and most developers probably won't go out past about 3 years. But yes, you can do big chunks of RECs. Okay, one more question, then I'll move on.
So we could also discuss this in more detail later, but I was wondering if you could speak to how these work in an independent system operator market type setting.
Yeah, hold that question, because I'm going to get to that, I think. If I don't, make sure you remind me, okay? Okay, so as I mentioned, established markets, really the US and Canada lead here as a combined North American market with RECs. So remember, if you're participating in any kind of green energy buying, you are buying RECs. It may not come that way, right? It might come as the wind source program, or anybody signed up with Arcadia? Yeah, Arcadia buys RECs from us. Yeah, they're great. I love Arcadia. You should check them out if you haven't yet. In Europe, similar instrument called a guarantee of origin. It's a little bit different because Europe has some very specific targets that it's trying to meet with renewables, but for our purposes, you can think of them as being just the same as RECs. There's also an IREC product, which is an international product. Gold Power, which was developed by one of our competitors, a friendly competitor out of Australia, mostly in Southeast Asia. And then Tigers, which is the newest product. It stands for Tradable Instruments for Global Renewables. It's developed by EACS, and it's currently only available in Singapore. But what's happening, I'm going to say why in just a minute, is that corporations are driving demand in these markets, and so we're starting to see things emerge, like CELs in Mexico, ZA RECs in South Africa, Green Power in Australia, Green Power certificates in Japan, and like every year there's more. Tigers is going to be expanding to India this year. And so corporations are driving a huge part of that demand. It's opening up all these new markets in all of these developing countries, which is really exciting. So this just is a visual snapshot of what I just talked about. It gives you a sense of where you can currently buy any of the stripy sections, or where we expect IREX will develop. Brazil, Poland actually is surprisingly really hot market for renewables right now. So all across sort of Northern Europe and Asia is where we expect a lot of that growth to come. In Africa as well, with established markets really in the Western marketplaces already. So that kind of talks about energy attribute certificates. We talk now about solar, and specifically on-site solar. So companies are using on-site. Probably you can think of some companies even here in Denver that use on-site. It's not as attractive as off-site because it's typically restricted by one of two things. One is either capital expenditure. Companies don't have the money to invest in a project even though costs are falling really rapidly, or they just don't have the space, right? Maybe they lease their facilities, maybe they have a product or service that's incredibly energy intensive, like a data center, and there's no way they could get enough solar on their roof to affect their actual energy load for that data center, okay? So the folks that are using solar, unsurprisingly, are primarily retailers, right? Walmart, the largest corporate on-site solar purchaser in the world, Target, Home Depot, Praxair, those are in the top 10. And so, you know, a big commonality there is that they have retail space. It's a lot easier to have your brick and mortar store, put your panels on the roof, you're all set. And so that's why we see retail really leading the charge in on-site. There are also markets that just aren't good for solar, so that's another constraint. Thankfully, where a lot of companies are headquartered in California and in the Northeast, there are good markets for solar. But, you know, there are also a lot of big companies kind of operating in the middle of the country, not a great location. So solar is kind of iffy when it comes to on-site for corporations. Typically what we see is that corporations are going to want to make up a relatively small percentage of their overall load from on-site. But there are also global opportunities. So India is one of the most dynamic and up-and-coming markets. And specifically because they have a really aggressive goal, they're trying to get to 175 gigawatts by 2025, which is awesome. And so there's more flexibility in that market to do business, and specifically in these southern states like Bangalore, Tamil Nadu. Those are a few of the states that are really attractive to companies because they're offering good incentives. And so for companies based in the US or Europe in particular that have load here in India, either their own operations or suppliers, those are attractive places to consider doing on-site. All right, let me get into talking about off-site now, and specifically about power purchase agreements. So power purchase agreements aren't new. They've been around for a long time. They're how utilities do deals with developers. The difference here is that the PPAs I'm talking about are bilateral, meaning that they're just between the corporate off-taker and the developer. They bypass the utility. That is scaring the hell out of utilities, I will tell you that. Maybe you've heard that, which I find exciting. They are a form of contract for differences. Anybody know what that means? Okay. A contract for differences basically is that you agree to a fixed price, and whenever there is a fluctuation in that price, somebody owes somebody money, okay? So in this particular case, the corporate off-taker is the one that agrees to a fixed price from the developer. Anytime the market dips below that fixed price, they make money. Anytime it goes above, they have to pay the developer. And so they're really betting on the fact that the market's going to be volatile, that over time the price of conventional generation is going to go up, and they're going to make money. And that's what they're betting on here. in this contract for differences. The other thing, as I mentioned, locks in a fixed price for power, very attractive to companies with a huge energy load, because then it's far more predictable what their energy costs will be. Really, at that point, the only gamble is, are we going to actually have to pay the developer? But a lot better than not really knowing what your utility is going to charge you in any given month. Also great for companies because it doesn't require any upfront capital investment. So as I mentioned, on-site solar, sometimes cost prohibitive for companies. They can't afford to do a system that's going to be large enough to meet their load. So instead, they're choosing a PPA because there isn't an upfront investment. Effectively, what's happening is that the company is posting credit to the developer. The developer is going to the financier and saying, see, I have a guaranteed off-taker. This person has posted credit, enhances my credit. You can give me the money to start my project, and then I give this power to this person that I made this arrangement with, okay? So that's really attractive to companies because then all they need is good credit. Not everybody has that. And for those companies, they still have to use RECs or on-site. But for those that do, they can really move forward with these big contracts. And there's a choice of 2 contract structures, depending on what a company's goals are, where they're located. They can either do what's called a retail or a retail sleeved PPA, which is a form of direct PPA. In order to do that, they have to share a grid with the developer. So for example, if Colorado were a deregulated state and CH2M Hill, who is based here, wanted to do a PPA, they could contract with someone else right here in our grid region. Technically, we're in WECC, it could be somebody in Montana because that shares a grid. And then they could do this sort of direct deal. For companies that don't share grid space, they can do what's called a financial PPA, or also known as a virtual or a synthetic PPA. I'm going to talk about both of those in detail. Any questions, though, before I go on to that? Yes?
How long is a PPA usually for?
That's a great question. They've been averaging around 20 years. And so companies are locking in long-term deals. And the reason to do that is because it takes a lot of resources to get a PPA done. They want to maximize that fixed price for as long as they can. And because most financial models on what's going to happen in the energy space don't go out much past about 20 years. So that's about the safest edge. We've seen some as long as 25, some around 10 to 12, one that was like 4, but that's very unusual for it to be that short. Yes?
Does the utility have any motivation to participate in this, or is it just mandated by their commission?
Yeah, it's a really, really great, important question. So I'll tell you the story about Nevada, which some of you might know. Nevada has been struggling the last few years. They had really good on-site incentives, and then they rolled those back, and people were really mad. And right about that same time, PPAs were really growing. And so MGM, who is the largest employer in the state of Nevada, went to the PUC and said, we want to do a PPA. We want to take advantage of this fixed price for power. And the PUC said no. And MGM said, okay, well, how can we get out of using you as our PUC? And they charged them $89 million to leave the PUC, which they paid, then did their PPA, and now they're 100% renewable in the state of Nevada. Not unrelated, the citizens of Nevada voted to deregulate in November, which will allow all companies that are in Nevada to pursue PPAs. So, does that answer your question? Mostly? Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about regulation and deregulation in just a minute, but that's an important component here. I was at an event in September, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it might have been Yahoo, ironically. Now they were just purchased by Verizon, but somebody on the panel of corporate buyers was saying, we're basically saying now to utilities, you're not going to let us buy energy the way we want to, we'll take our business elsewhere. So utilities are scrambling, and they are freaked out by what's happening in this market. Yes?
What was the sightings for MGM?
Well, it's interesting. Most companies won't publish that.
Yeah.
None of our clients want to share that information. given some of the net present value forecasting that we do for our customers, I would guess over the duration of that, anywhere between 25 and 100 million.
Well, it should be said that they just accepted that price right on, which they didn't really expect this would happen.
That's right.
It must have been a good price.
Right. Yes,
Right.
the numbers are gonna make sense, but I was
Yeah.
just curious,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, so if you considering they paid the 89 million to leave, yeah, somewhere in there they figured out how to make it work. Yeah. Okay, so actually, that was a good segue into my image here of a net present value model, okay? So what you're seeing over here on the left is the historic retail market price, okay? Big fluctuations, especially in the winter, in the price of electricity. This buyer wanting to get in on the market here, okay, is looking at a forecast. And they're looking at it in the wholesale market, which is another big deal here. So PPAs allow buyers to play in the wholesale market rather than the retail market. So there's a difference even in price there. Wholesale market price is super low right now. Retail price is still going up. So this allows them to realize savings in that way as well. So what you're seeing here, bottom line, very bear case, right? Almost impossible that this is going to happen, which is that there's going to be no inflation or price growth in the energy market. Historically, we know that's not true. Energy is the most volatile commodity in the world, okay? This blue line in the middle here is the PPA price. So I said it was locked in. So you'll see that is why it has this very steady, slow rate of growth. The reason for that is that most PPAs do include a small cost escalator, mostly inflation oriented, to pay for the cost of maintenance. But once you get a solar or wind project in the ground, there's almost no other expense related to it, okay? So most of our customers are getting a 1 to 2% escalator on their PPAs over the course of time. Then you've got a couple of other gas cases here, low, mid, the bullish, high case. And so what you're seeing is that over time, as those projections are happening, here's what the buyer is still paying. So even out here in 2029, when the bull case is projected to be way up here, they're saving money here if they're locked in. And that's where that NPV is coming from. So in this particular example, that would be an NPV over that duration, which is 12 years, of almost $60 million in savings. Now, if this is a financial PPA, which we're going to look at in a minute, they're still paying their utility, okay? Because they don't have to share a grid region with this project. It was a huge epiphany for me a couple of years ago when I realized a financial PPA is just a very complicated REC transaction. So remember when we were talking about RECs and that they don't have to be where you are, you can buy them from different markets. These PPAs work in a similar way. So you're still paying for your retail electricity, which is going to be way up here, but the developer's paying you a ton of money because you've locked in this fixed price to post credit so they can build their project. Yes?
In a market of fairly positive interest rates, how have you guys got a discount rate of 9.5%? Is it industry specific?
That is beyond my pay grade. I apologize.
No worries.
But I could put you in touch with the right people at Renewable Choice to answer that question. Okay. So, big part of what's happening here is the production tax credit and the investment tax credit, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. We've got a 5-year runway on the PTC and ITC, 4 years now on the PTC. And the reason this is important is because those prices, even though the prices of technology are falling, are way better with the subsidy than without, okay? And so all that this is demonstrating is that, in 16, we had a $23 per megawatt hour subsidy. We're down here in a 5-year period to no PTC, right? And the goal is that by that point, prices will be so low that they won't need it, right? I anticipate we'll probably see some more negotiating here. A lot of it will depend on what happens with our incoming administration. ITC is the same for the next few years. It's got a 30% subsidy, and then it steps down also to an ongoing 10% subsidy in 2022. Yes, that's right. So we had a big push in 2016 to try to get projects in the ground to take advantage of that full price PTC. And now we'll see a step down. And so projects are going to become less attractive. However, the actual price of technology is still coming down. So what we anticipate happening is that I expect wind will start to fall off around here for corporate buyers, and solar is going to go way up because the tech costs are dropping so dramatically, and they've got this nice juicy subsidy that it's going to make solar very attractive to corporate buyers in about 2 years. Okay, so I think this gets back to your question, which is around regulation. And we talked just a little bit already about this with Nevada example. So what are highlighted here on the maps are the deregulated RTO and ISOs. Yes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What department in the government provides that subsidy?
That's a really good question. I think it's the Department of Energy. Yeah. Does anybody know for sure? No, because FERC is involved with the operation of the RTOs. We were specifically talking about where the subsidy on the PTC and the ITC comes from.
It's just avoidance of taxes from the IRS.
Yeah.
It's written in the tax code.
Yeah, and in fact, so when they did the extension at the end of, what year are we in? At the end of 15, it was part of a huge tax extenders bill. Yeah. Yeah. So what you're looking at up here, the colored regions are the deregulated transmission regions, right? Called either an RTO, a regional transmission organization, or an ISO, an independent system operator. These extend into Canada as well. And so many of them are multi-state. ERCOT is almost all of Texas by itself, and the California ISO by itself. And so you can see, poor Colorado, here we are in WECC, and we're regulated, okay, as is most of the Southeast. So the reason that is important is that only deregulated projects in deregulated states can have PPAs. So that's why I say, if we've got a really cool project here in Colorado, and we got a lot of cool stuff going on in Colorado, so don't hear me incorrectly on that, but we can't have companies doing PPAs here because we're regulated. Yes?
Amy, I think it'd be important to clarify that you can't do an off-site PPA.
That's correct, thank you. Yes.
And do it on your own roof.
Yes, you can't do it on your own roof, yeah. So PPAs are the same structure that you're using if you're doing your own solar on your own home, yeah.
Or your own business or facility.
Right, yes. But yes, these big off-site PPAs, you can only do them in states that are deregulated. Yes?
You're referring to a bilateral PPA?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yep, bilateral PPA where it's developer, buyer, takes out the PUC. So let me talk through how these work a little bit, because PPAs can be kind of confusing. And because we're talking about two different structures, I think that'll be helpful for you. So this is the retail PPA. So in the retail PPA, as a reminder, you have to share a grid region. So for example, the state of California is a good one because they're driving a huge amount of solar there. They're a deregulated state. And so somebody like a Google or a Facebook that has their headquarters there and wants to do a solar project, that would be a good example of a direct project, okay? So first step is that, again, we're kind of bypassing this middle section, which is the PUC, right? The grid and the electric service provider. So the corporate, let's call this Facebook, okay? They pay the developer directly for the renewable energy in the PPA, and they take possession of the RECs, okay? So that's the contract that's happening there. That energy is actually getting delivered to the grid, just like we talked about before, right? Unless you've got panels on your home or your business, it's hard to take direct delivery, except in this case, because you share a grid region, you technically are. So the ESP in this case gets that energy. They supplement with additional energy to meet the demand for the grid. And then that actual electricity is delivered to Facebook's headquarters, okay? And then the corporate is basically paying the ASP for that offtake. But the difference here is that behind this, they've got this agreement with the developer. This is why this is called sometimes a retail sleeved PPA, because this is the sleeve, okay? So you're still having your transaction with your ESP, just like you were before, but you've got this sort of behind the scenes deal with the developer, and that's where you're earning your money back. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay.
Would you do a real deal to explain that? And Facebook spends $1 million to buy from the PUC or from the provider?
Yeah, so, yeah, it's a little bit tricky to explain it that way because there's not cash being exchanged here, right? Because remember, PPAs don't require any upfront expenditures. This is a contract between these two parties for that contract for differences, right? So what's happening here is this is just a regular sort of exchange of energy that's happening all over the grid, right? Projects creating energy, it's going to the grid, it's going to the PUC, it's going to this facility. But behind the scenes, we have this agreement where if this price is exceeding the price that has been contracted for, then that's where the money is being exchanged. Does that make sense?
Well, so the developer then gives money back to the buyer,
That's correct.
and the developer has a contract with the electric company. I'm not sure what that contract says.
That's correct. So it's two different contracts. The difference is that the electric service provider is charging for power based on demand, right? And so prices are going up, they're going down, and so that is being contracted here just as it would be anywhere. And it's based on supply and demand, the spot market, and the trade of that particular point in time. So one thing that is really important for understanding PPAs is that where they are located can make a big difference, and we call this basis risk. If a project is located in a region where there's a lot of congestion on transmission lines, that can affect the price because the energy may not be getting to the ESP as easily. And so one of the things that we advise our clients on is taking that basis risk into account in the actual performance of a project over time. And so yes, there's two agreements here. Well, there's three, really. There's Facebook's agreement with their ESP, there's the project's agreement with the ESP, and then there's the agreement between the two of them to do that contract for differences. Yes?
So, number 4, when it's
Yes.
energy, are you paying for the delta of the additional energy used to meet demand plus congestion plus distribution?
Theoretically, you could, depending on how the contract was structured. Yeah. That's why it's hard for me to give you concrete examples because contracts can be very different based on how they're structured. I know that's frustrating because it would help, but they're all very different. Did you have another question though, Avi, about that?
I'm still trying to understand.
I know, it's complicated. And I'm going to make it worse because now I'm going to show you the other contract type, okay? All right, so now let's talk about the financial or the virtual PPA. Similar but different, okay? So, first thing that happens is that this is the posting credit, okay? The corporate buyer says, okay, wind project X, I'm going to agree to a fixed price, and in exchange, I'm going to post my credit so that you can get financed, okay? Everybody clear so far? Okay, so we'll call that $20 per megawatt hour. Okay, so then energy comes down onto the grid, per usual, okay? And that grid operator is going to pay the project owner for the wholesale power price, which in this case, the example is $25 per megawatt hour, let's say. And then that financial settlement is happening between these two entities. So the corporate buyer is contracted for the $20 The actual charge from the grid is $25, so there's a $5 difference in this case. Okay. So now the corporate buyer's up $5, the project's down $5. Sorry about that. We have an extra step in there. And then the other thing that's under consideration here are the energy attribute certificates. Okay. So not only is there sort of money changing hands for the actual power, but again, there's no power being delivered here, right? That's the difference. EACs also come into play because if the buyer wants to make those environmental claims, they've got to own EACs. So they've either got to own the EACs from this project, or they may arbitrage those, sell them off, and buy cheap bricks somewhere else. That's something else that they can do. And then they just continue buying their regular power from the utility. So they're similar, but a little bit different. The biggest difference is that this could be happening anywhere in the United States, right? This project would have to be located in one of those deregulated regions, but the buyer could be located anywhere. So if I'm CH2M Hill and I want to do this, I can't do it in Colorado, but I could do it in Texas. Whereas if I want to be in that direct relationship with my developer, we have to share a grid region. Okay? So this just visualizes that a little bit further. So virtual PPAs, the power gets liquidated locally into the spot market and settled financially between the grid operator and the project. There's no physical delivery of power. And this can be helpful for companies that have load that is across the United States because they can aggregate their load in total because there's no electrons being exchanged, if that makes sense to everybody. So if I've got, Amazon's a good example. Their headquarters is in Seattle, but they've got distribution facilities all over the country. And so that's how they're using these virtual or financial PPAs to meet that load. Whereas in the direct PPA, again, they have to be in the same market. The contract is sleeved through the utility, and the actual megawatt hours are matched to the contracted facility's use. And so this map is a little bit confusing, but in a financial PPA, a virtual PPA, the projects, again, have to be located in any of these deregulated regions, but the actual physical facilities can be in any state, any region. Whereas in a retail PPA, the projects have to be located in any of the deregulated regions, and the facilities have to be in those same sort of connected regions. So buyers choose direct PPAs typically if they can either get a better price, or they might choose it because they really want to support the development of renewable energy in their own region, like in California, if they're in California also. Most companies, 85%, are choosing the virtual structure because it gives them such flexibility in terms of their location and the project's location. Yes?
Do you see any hope for future deregulation of the rest of the country?
Oh, I hope so. Yes, I do. I think Nevada is a great example, right? When the largest employer says, screw you, PUC, suddenly the voters line up and say, let's deregulate. So yes, I do.
Yeah, at this point, I want to mention that Boulder-CRES recently had Ken Riegelson speaking, and this presentation is online. And Ken Riegelson, his big argument was basically, if we had electricity deregulation on that front, anybody would swarm towards the renewables because they are cheaper.
That's right.
And so he holds great hope for that, and I hold great hope that you will go to our YouTube channel and check out these presentations. Thank you.
That's right. Yes, Michael? Oh, I gotta wrap it up. Sorry. Okay, we're close. Okay, very close. All right, so PPA is mostly happening here in the US, but there are also global markets for offsite PPAs. Most notably, as I mentioned, India is definitely an up-and-coming on-site and off-site, and Scandinavia. In fact, if you've heard folks like Facebook, for example, doing European PPAs. They've been in Scandinavia or in the UK. They're still paying a premium on those PPAs, but that is a market that is rapidly opening up, and so that's where we see sort of the next big thing. South America also, in Chile there, next big market there is Brazil. So last thing I want to talk about, I'm sorry, I've been kind of rattling on. I could talk about this a lot for probably the whole night, are the benefits and the risks for buyers. Like, they're entering into these long-term contracts, right? 20-year long contracts. I think a lot of companies don't even know if they're going to be around in 20 years, right? So that's why we see that these market makers are folks like Google, Amazon, Facebook. You know, they can relatively guarantee they're going to be around for a long time. But what's really up and coming is that smaller companies are now really hungry. And so we're starting to see a call for syndicates of buyers or aggregated deals where maybe it's a big 100 megawatt deal and, you know, there's 10 megawatt off takers. The trick there is trying to get 10 companies to work together on a common project, right? So benefits, they can save millions of dollars, as we've talked about, which is awesome. The fixed price protects them against those future price fluctuations. If you put that together, what you'll realize is that we're sort of working at odds against ourselves. The more renewables we get on the grid, the less volatility there is on the grid. So PPAs have a limited lifespan. It hedges against a natural market short position. So what I mean there is that you can typically only buy energy a couple of years into the future. And so you are naturally at a short financially on your energy costs. And that's a huge exposure for large companies. Locking in that fixed price for power means that no matter what happens in the market, you have some guarantee out into the future of what your energy costs will be. And then clean generation helps them achieve all kinds of goals. Carbon reduction, climate action, which they're really being pushed on now, reduced water consumption. Renewables use a fraction of the water that fossil fuels do, and a lot of companies have water targets as well. And then just general responsibility. They're helping to clean up the environment for their employees in the communities where they operate, stimulate economic growth, etc. Risks are there. We spend a lot of time working with our clients and managing risk. The first, as I mentioned, is that market risk. So depending on where your project is located and how it performs, it's a big source of risk for these companies. And so that can depend on how saturated the market is, what shape the market takes over time. Execution risk, which really relates to the developer. You know, like we had a deal go sideways literally like as it was being signed because a community came back and wouldn't approve the siting on the project. So that was that for that project, unfortunately. And so there are execution-related risks with these projects. And then operational risks, you know, that the price goes way up or down, exposes companies, or, you know, there's an act of God that takes out the project and suddenly they're subject to that market price fluctuation again. So there are risks, but a huge part of what we do in our capacity is help customers try to manage those risks in these big contracts. Yes?
What about default risk of developers going out of business, bankruptcy, those types of
Yeah, it could, that would likely fall into sort of this execution risk or operational risk category. It definitely could happen. More likely probably is that there will be like an M&A. That there's a lot of that happening in the developer world right now. But there's also a lot of really small, hungry, up-and-coming developers too. So it's always a really interesting dynamic market on the developer side for sure. All right, I think that's it. It is. Other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Oh, we do have some questions. All right, I saw a couple hands.
So I've learned a lot tonight that I didn't know. So, but there's all these different contracts and transactions going on. In the big picture, what is different now that will prevent an Enron-like calamity from happening? Right, what's different now?
That is a very interesting question. Anybody else want to take that one?
Nothing. The answer is nothing.
I suppose the answer could be nothing. What I want to say is that this is what I was alluding to earlier, is that what I just described here, I believe, is unstoppable, right? So even, for example, if President Trump were to pull the PTC and the ITC, which is one of the big fears in the industry, right? Corporations aren't going to care. They're going to keep buying renewables. They're going to move internationally. And so I feel like there are enough players in the space and there's enough momentum that even if something like that happened.
So I'm guessing the answer is that all of these contracts are directly between buyer and seller.
That's correct.
There isn't a market maker, which is what Enron was.
That's right.
They played the market.
Right.
So,
In this particular case, Google is the market maker, right? And in fact, now Google, Apple, I'm missing somebody else, have FERC licenses, right? So they can sell their excess energy on the market. And so all of a sudden now we have corporations, market makers, playing in this space, but they're not utilities, they're not Enrons, they're just their own company and they have an energy division. It's crazy.
do they need to own a generation?
They do, because they own these PPAs. Yeah, so they own a piece of or a whole project that they are recouping that energy off of. Yeah, it's really cool.
That kind of goes into a question I kind of came up with when you're talking about having solar on your house. So somewhere like Las Vegas, because we talk about Nevada a lot. I know in Las Vegas you can't sell your solar power back to NV Energy anymore. They won't buy it back from you anymore. Basically, we're done with that. But now that it's deregulated, could you potentially sell that power to your neighbor?
Yes.
Do personal PPA type deal?
Sure. Yeah. You'd have to go through all these steps, right? Guaranteeing your neighbor why that wasn't a risky proposition, but theoretically, yes, you could. And then the question would be, who's going to get the claims, right? Who's going to get those RECs from those solar panels to be able to say, I'm using clean power or I'm using clean power?
So that's where you get your tax write-off.
Depends on how it's structured in your state. Yeah, but that's how you get the claim to the clean energy, right? Otherwise, you can't make a claim to it. It's just power. All right, we got to cut off. Thank you. I'll hang around if you have questions. It was nice to be here. Thank you very much.